Sarah Thompson lived a quiet life in the suburbs, where everything seemed perfect on the surface. Her home was nestled in a neighborhood that looked like it had been pulled straight out of a postcard. Neatly trimmed lawns, colorful flower beds, and streets so clean you could eat off them. She shared this cozy little house with her 10-year-old son, Ethan, who had a knack for making her laugh even on tough days, and their golden retriever, Max, whose wagging tail was a constant source of comfort. Sarah wasn't just any resident. She was the newly appointed county sheriff, a role that came with its own set of challenges, but also gave her a deep sense of pride. Being a single mom meant juggling work and family, but Sarah handled it all with grace. She believed in fairness, honesty, and doing what was right, not only at her job but also within her community. That's why, when letters started arriving from the Homeowners Association, HOA, she paid attention. At first, the HOA complaints were small things. Her grass needed trimming, or her car was parked too close to the curb. Sarah didn't mind. After all, rules existed to keep the neighborhood looking nice, and she was happy to oblige. But as time went on, the notices became more frequent and increasingly unreasonable. One letter demanded she repaint her mailbox because it didn't match the approved color palette. Another insisted she remove a bird feeder from her backyard because it attracted squirrels, which apparently disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the area. Despite her growing frustration, Sarah tried to stay calm. She figured these were harmless nitpicks, nothing worth losing sleep over. She made adjustments where she could, hoping to smooth things over. Yet no matter how much effort she put into complying, the HOA never seemed satisfied. It felt like they were watching her every move, waiting for her to slip up. What Sarah didn't realize was that behind closed doors, the HOA members harbored resentment toward her. To them, she wasn't just another homeowner trying to get by. She was someone who represented authority. As the county sheriff, Sarah symbolized accountability and justice, qualities that clashed with the HOA's desire for unchecked control. They saw her presence as a threat, especially since rumors swirled about their questionable practices. And while Sarah focused on raising Ethan and keeping her neighborhood safe, the HOA began plotting something far darker. The tension simmered beneath the surface, unnoticed by most residents. Neighbors continued going about their daily lives, oblivious to the storm brewing around Sarah. Meanwhile, Ethan played outside after school, chasing Max around the yard, blissfully unaware of the trouble brewing. For now, life still felt normal. But beneath the serene facade of the suburban paradise, cracks were beginning to form, and soon, they would widen into chasms that would change everything. It was one of those evenings when Sarah returned home late after a long day of the sheriff's office. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the neighborhood in shadows. Streetlights flickered to life as she pulled into her driveway, weary but relieved to finally be home. She looked forward to unwinding with Ethan, and maybe taking Max for a quick walk before bedtime. But something felt off the moment she stepped out of her car. Her front door was slightly ajar. Sarah froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight on her keychain. Her heart pounded as she pushed the door open wider, calling out softly, "Ethan." "Max?" Silence greeted her. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She flipped on the lights and began searching each room, dread pooling in her stomach. Nothing seemed disturbed. No broken windows, no overturned furniture. But Ethan's backpack lay abandoned on the kitchen table, and Max's leash hung untouched by the door. Panic surged through her veins. Where were they? Sarah grabbed her phone and dialed Ethan's number, pacing anxiously as it rang. No answer. She called out to neighbors, knocking on doors and asking if anyone had seen him or Max. Everyone shook their heads, concern etched on their faces. As the minutes ticked by, fear tightened its grip around her chest. Something was terribly wrong. Desperate for answers, Sarah checked the security cameras she'd installed months ago. At first glance, the footage showed nothing unusual, just the usual comings and goings of neighbors until nighttime fell. Then, around 8:30 p.m., two shadowy figures appeared on screen. One carried what looked like a limp body draped over his shoulder, while the other dragged a large dog by a leash. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized the body belonged to Ethan. And the dog was Max. The camera captured the kidnappers loading Ethan and Max into a dark van parked outside her house. Before driving away, one of the figures turned to face the camera. Even in the grainy video, Sarah recognized him instantly. It was Roger Hensley, a member of the HOA board who had been particularly vocal about her supposed violations. His smirk sent chills down her spine, a look that screamed arrogance and malice. Sarah's mind raced. Why would someone from the HOA do this? What had she done to deserve such cruelty? Her thoughts shifted between anger, fear, and disbelief. This wasn't just some random crime. It was personal. Whoever took Ethan and Max knew exactly who she was and wanted to send her a message. Without wasting another second, Sarah sprang into action. She contacted local authorities, sharing the footage and demanding an immediate investigation. Every officer she spoke to promised to help, but deep down, Sarah knew she couldn't rely solely on others. She was a mother first and a sheriff second, and she wouldn't rest until her son and dog were safe. As dawn approached, sleep eluded her. Sitting alone in her dimly lit living room, Sarah replayed the events of the night in her mind. Each unanswered question gnawed at her resolve. Who else was involved? Where had they taken Ethan and Max? And most importantly, why? Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would test her strength, courage, and determination in ways she never imagined. The next few days were a blur of frantic phone calls, sleepless nights, and endless searching. Sarah threw herself into finding Ethan and Max, using every resource at her disposal as both a mother and the county sheriff. She pored over traffic camera footage, tracked down witnesses, and even enlisted the help of state police. Yet despite her relentless efforts, there were no solid leads, just dead ends and mounting frustration. Then, just when hope seemed to be slipping away, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A gas station clerk in a small town nearly 300 miles away reported seeing a boy matching Ethan's description being dragged into a roadside motel by two men. The clerk also mentioned a large golden retriever locked inside their van, whimpering pitifully. When shown pictures of Ethan and Max, the clerk nodded solemnly. "That's them," he said. "I remember because the dog looked so sad." Sarah's heart leaped at the news, but it was quickly tempered by fear. 300 miles was a long way, and time was running out. She grabbed her badge, her gun, and a map, then set off on the journey with a mix of determination and dread swirling in her gut. Along the way, she couldn't shake the image of that smirking face on her security footage. Roger Hensley's face. What kind of person could do something like this? And why go to such lengths? When Sarah finally arrived at the motel, exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders, but adrenaline kept her moving. The building was run down, its paint peeling and windows grimy. She approached the office cautiously, flashing her badge at the front desk clerk. "I'm looking for a boy and a dog," she explained, showing photos of Ethan and Max. The clerk hesitated before pointing toward room 12 at the far end of the lot. Heart pounding, Sarah knocked on the door, drawing her weapon just in case. There was no answer. She tried again, louder this time, but still nothing. Finally, she used her authority to demand access, and the motel manager reluctantly unlocked the room for her. Inside, the space was messy but empty. No Ethan, no Max. Just a hastily scribbled note left on the bed. Sarah picked it up with trembling hands. Written in bold letters were the words, "Stay out of our business, Sheriff." Beneath the message was the HOA's insignia, a symbol she now associated with menace rather than community pride. Her knees nearly buckled under the weight of despair, but anger quickly replaced it. This wasn't just about keeping her quiet anymore. It was personal. Whoever had taken Ethan and Max wanted to punish her. to break her spirit, but they had underestimated one crucial thing: Sarah's unyielding love for her son and her fierce commitment to justice. Back in her car, Sarah stared at the note, piecing together what little information she had. The kidnappers clearly thought they could intimidate her into backing off, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. As the county sheriff, Sarah had faced criminals, solved cases, and brought wrongdoers to justice. But this was different. This was her family. Determined more than ever, Sarah decided to dig deeper into the HOA's activities. Something told her this wasn't just about neighborhood rules or minor grievances. It went much deeper. If Roger Hensley and his accomplices were willing to kidnap a child and a dog, what else were they capable of? What secrets were they hiding? With newfound resolve, Sarah began gathering evidence, connecting dots, and uncovering clues that others might have missed. Each discovery brought her closer to understanding the true nature of the HOA's operations and to finding Ethan and Max. Though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: Sarah would stop at nothing to bring her family home, no matter how dangerous the truth turned out to be. Sarah's investigation into the HOA quickly revealed that this wasn't just a group of overly strict neighbors enforcing trivial rules. As she dug deeper, the layers of corruption began to peel back, exposing something far more sinister than she could have imagined. Her initial suspicion that Roger Hensley and his accomplices were targeting her personally was only the tip of the iceberg. At first, Sarah focused on financial records. She knew from experience that money often left trails, and in this case, it led her straight to the heart of the HOA's operations. What she found was staggering. Large sums of money funneled through shell companies, forged documents approving land deals, and bribes paid to local officials to look the other way. The HOA wasn't just about maintaining property values. It was running a sophisticated scam designed to enrich its members at the expense of unsuspecting homeowners. But what shocked Sarah most was the extent of their intimidation tactics. Families who questioned the HOA's decisions were subjected to harassment. Fines piled up for minor infractions, construction permits mysteriously delayed, and some even received threats if they dared to speak out. It became clear that Ethan and Max weren't taken because of a petty grudge. They were leverage, a way to silence Sarah before she uncovered the truth. As pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Sarah realized she couldn't confront the HOA head-on without risking Ethan and Max's lives. Instead, she devised a risky plan: pretend to back down while secretly gathering enough evidence to dismantle the entire organization. This meant playing along with their demands, attending meetings, and feigning compliance, all while working tirelessly behind the scenes to build her case. The HOA members welcomed her apparent surrender, inviting her to their next meeting under the guise of patching things up. Sarah walked into the room feeling like an actor stepping onto a stage, forcing herself to smile politely as Roger Hensley shook her hand. Inside, though, her stomach churned with disgust. These people had taken her son and dog, drugged them, and dumped them miles away. And now they expected her to play nice. During the meeting, Sarah listened intently as the board discussed upcoming projects, many of which involved shady land acquisitions and inflated contracts. She noticed how casually they spoke about manipulating zoning laws and pressuring residents into selling their homes below market value. One member even joked about how easy it was to scare off troublemakers. Sarah clenched her fists under the table, but kept her expression neutral. Every word they said added fuel to her determination. Outside of these meetings, Sarah worked late nights sifting through documents, tracing connections between the HOA and local officials, and piecing together a timeline of their illegal activities. She reached out to trusted colleagues who agreed to help discreetly, knowing full well that going after such a powerful group would put her in grave danger. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was bringing Ethan and Max home safely. As the days passed, Sarah grew closer to uncovering the location where Ethan and Max were being held. A slip of information here, a careless comment there. It all added up. She learned that the HOA president, a man named Victor Langston, owned a remote cabin deep in the woods. It was isolated, rarely visited, and perfect for hiding someone, or two someones, away from prying eyes. With each new discovery, Sarah felt a mix of emotions: rage at the injustice, fear for her son and dog, and a burning desire to see justice served. She knew the stakes were high. If the HOA discovered what she was doing, there was no telling how far they'd go to protect themselves. But Sarah wasn't afraid. She had faced dangerous criminals before, and she wouldn't let anyone, not even her own neighbors, stand in the way of reuniting her family. By the time she had gathered enough evidence to act, Sarah was ready. Her heart pounded with anticipation as she finalized her plan. This wasn't just about rescuing Ethan and Max anymore. It was about taking down a corrupt system that had preyed on innocent people for years. And when the moment came, Sarah vowed to strike swiftly, decisively, and without mercy. Sarah's plan was as daring as it was dangerous. She knew that rescuing Ethan and Max wouldn't be easy, especially since the remote cabin where they were being held was likely guarded. But she also knew she couldn't wait any longer. Every second counted, and her son's life, along with Max, was on the line. With a mix of fear and determination driving her forward, Sarah prepared for the mission ahead. She reached out to two trusted colleagues from the sheriff's department, Detective Mark Harris, who had years of undercover experience, and Officer Lisa Chen, an expert in tactical operations. Both agreed to help without hesitation, knowing how high the stakes were. Together, they mapped out a strategy to approach the cabin under the cover of darkness, using the dense woods as camouflage. Sarah insisted on leading the operation herself. After all, this wasn't just another case. It was personal. The night of the rescue felt endless. The drive to the cabin was quiet, save for the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves outside. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, clutching a flashlight and mentally rehearsing every step of the plan. As they neared the location, the three parked their vehicle far enough away to avoid detection and began their trek through the forest. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine, but none of them noticed. Their focus was razor sharp. When they finally reached the edge of the property, Sarah signaled for everyone to stop. Through the trees, they could see the dim glow of light spilling from the windows of the cabin. A single van was parked outside, its tires caked with mud, a clear sign it had traveled rough terrain recently. Sarah's heart skipped a beat when she spotted movement near the door. Two men stood guard, talking quietly and occasionally glancing around nervously. They looked like amateurs, but amateurs with guns were still dangerous. Mark and Lisa flanked Sarah as they crept closer, staying low to avoid being seen. When they were within earshot, Sarah heard one of the guards mention checking on the kid and the dog. Her stomach churned at the thought of Ethan locked up somewhere inside, drugged and scared. She clenched her jaw, pushing aside her emotions to stay focused. Using hand signals, Sarah directed Mark and Lisa to circle around to the back of the cabin while she approached the front. The goal was simple: distract the guards long enough to disarm them and secure the area. Once inside, they'd locate Ethan and Max and get them out safely. As luck would have it, the guards stepped onto the porch for a smoke break, leaving the door slightly ajar. Sarah seized the opportunity. She moved swiftly, her boots barely making a sound against the soft earth. Just as she reached the porch, one of the guards turned toward her. Before he could react, she flashed her badge and barked, "Sheriff's Department. Hands where I can see them." The man froze, his cigarette falling from his lips. His partner fumbled for his gun, but Lisa emerged from the shadows, her own weapon drawn. "Don't even think about it," she warned, her voice steady and commanding. Within seconds, both guards were disarmed and restrained. Inside the cabin, the scene was heartbreaking. Ethan lay curled up on a thin mattress in the corner of a small room, pale and weak but alive. Beside him, Max whimpered softly, his tail thumping weakly when he saw Sarah. Tears welled up in her eyes as she knelt beside her son, gently brushing his hair from his forehead. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Mommy's here." Ethan stirred, blinking groggily. "Mom," he murmured, his voice hoarse. Sarah nodded, pulling him into a tight hug. Max struggled to stand, his legs wobbly, but Sarah wrapped her arms around him too, holding both her boy and her dog close. For a moment, everything else faded away. The danger, the corruption, the fear. All that mattered was that they were together again. But the reunion was short-lived. Footsteps echoed outside, followed by voices shouting angrily. Sarah's blood ran cold. Victor Langston and Roger Hensley had returned earlier than expected. The sound of approaching voices sent a jolt of panic through Sarah, but she quickly pushed it aside. There was no time to waste. Victor Langston and Roger Hensley were back, and they weren't alone. She could hear at least 2 more sets of footsteps crunching against the gravel outside. Her mind raced as she glanced around the room, assessing their options. Ethan was still groggy, barely able to sit up on his own, and Max's movements were sluggish. They couldn't run, not yet. They needed a plan, and fast. Sarah turned to Lisa and Mark, who had already taken defensive positions near the door. "We hold them off here," she whispered urgently. "Get Ethan and Max ready to move as soon as we clear the way." Lisa nodded, her expression grim but determined. Mark handed Sarah his backup flashlight, which doubled as a tactical tool. "Stay sharp," he murmured before turning his attention back to the doorway. Moments later, the cabin door burst open, and Victor stormed in, his face red with rage. Behind him, Roger hesitated, glancing nervously between Victor and the armed officers standing guard. 2 more men followed, both carrying weapons that looked like they'd been pulled straight out of a pawn shop. It was clear none of them were professionals, but amateurs with guns were unpredictable, and Sarah knew better than to underestimate them. "Sheriff Thompson," Victor sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "I should have known you'd show your face sooner or later. Did you really think you could take us down?" Sarah stepped forward, positioning herself between Victor and Ethan. Her tone was calm but firm. "This ends now, Victor. Let us walk out of here with my son and dog, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get a chance to explain yourself in court instead of rotting in prison." Victor laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You don't understand, do you? You've always been in our way, poking your nose where it doesn't belong. We're untouchable." Sarah raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a faint smirk despite the tension. "Untouchable? Really? Because I've got enough evidence to bury every single one of you. Your little empire is crumbling, Victor. And if anything happens to me, or my family tonight, you'll wish you'd never heard of me." For a split second, doubt flickered across Victor's face. He glanced at Roger, who shifted uncomfortably under Sarah's steely gaze. The other 2 men exchanged uneasy looks, clearly unsure of what to do next. Sarah seized the moment, raising her voice just enough to command attention. "Put down your weapons. This isn't worth throwing your lives away for." One of the men hesitated, lowering his gun slightly. But Victor wasn't about to back down. "Don't listen to her," he barked, pointing his own weapon at Sarah. "She's bluffing." Before anyone could react, chaos erupted. One of the men lunged toward Mark, who quickly disarmed him with practiced precision. Lisa tackled another assailant, pinning him to the ground before he could fire a shot. In the commotion, Victor swung his gun wildly, shouting threats, while Roger backed away, visibly trembling. Sarah didn't hesitate. She moved swiftly, using the flashlight to strike Victor's hand, and knocked the gun from his grip. He stumbled backward, clutching his wrist and cursing loudly. Without missing a beat, she kicked the weapon out of reach and delivered a sharp blow to his stomach, sending him crashing to the floor. By the time the dust settled, all 4 intruders were subdued, either cuffed or too stunned to fight back. Sarah stood over Victor, breathing heavily but victorious. "Game over," she said simply, her voice cold and final. Mark and Lisa helped Ethan and Max to their feet, supporting them as they made their way outside. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. As Sarah watched her son lean against Max, Tears streaming down both their faces, she felt a surge of relief and resolve. This nightmare was finally ending, but the battle wasn't quite over yet. Justice still needed to be served. With the kidnappers in custody and her family safe, Sarah allowed herself a brief moment of gratitude. Then, steeling herself for what lay ahead, she turned toward the rising sun, ready to ensure that no one else would ever suffer at the hands of the corrupt HOA again. The days that followed the rescue at the cabin were a whirlwind of activity for Sarah, but they also marked the beginning of healing for her family and the community. Ethan, though physically weak from being drugged, slowly regained his strength under the care of doctors and therapists. Max, too, bounced back with time, his tail wagging more vigorously each day as he realized he was safe again. Sarah spent every spare moment by their sides, holding Ethan's hand and stroking Max's fur, grateful just to have them home. Meanwhile, the fallout from the HOA scandal exploded into public view. News outlets picked up the story, exposing the corruption that had festered in the neighborhood for years. Documents leaked by Sarah's team revealed illegal land deals, forged permits, and bribes paid to local officials. The once revered HOA board members became pariahs overnight, their faces plastered across headlines alongside accusations of kidnapping, extortion, and fraud. Victor Langston, Roger Hensley, and their accomplices were arrested and charged with multiple felonies, their reputations left in ruins. Residents who had lived in fear of the HOA finally found the courage to speak out. Dozens came forward with stories of intimidation, harassment, and financial exploitation. Some admitted they'd suspected wrongdoing but were too afraid to act. Others expressed shock, claiming they'd trusted the HOA blindly. For the first time, people began talking openly about how the organization had manipulated and controlled their lives, and how Sarah Thompson had risked everything to bring it down. Sarah's actions earned her widespread admiration. Neighbors who had once criticized her violations now hailed her as a hero. Local officials scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal, promising reforms and transparency moving forward. The state attorney general launched an investigation into similar HOAs across the county, vowing to root out corruption wherever it existed. It was a turning point not just for Sarah's neighborhood, but for communities everywhere affected by unchecked power. At work, Sarah faced both praise and criticism. Some colleagues admired her bravery, calling her a role model for law enforcement officers everywhere. Others whispered concerns about whether she had crossed ethical lines during her undercover operation. But Sarah didn't dwell on the negativity. She knew what mattered most. Ethan and Max were safe, and justice would be served. In court, the evidence against the HOA members was overwhelming. One by one, they pleaded guilty in exchange for reduced sentences, unable to deny the mountain of proof stacked against them. Victor Langston received the harshest punishment, sentenced to decades behind bars without parole. As the judge delivered the verdict, Sarah sat quietly in the courtroom, her expression unreadable. Justice had been done, but it didn't erase the scars left by the ordeal. Back home, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such a harrowing experience. Ethan struggled with nightmares at first, often waking up crying for his mom. Sarah stayed patient, reassuring him that he was safe now and that no one would ever hurt him again. Max seemed to sense Ethan's distress, staying glued to his side like a loyal guardian. Together, the three of them formed an unbreakable bond, stronger than ever before. One evening, weeks after the trial concluded, Sarah took Ethan and Max for a walk along a quiet trail near their house. The air was crisp, the sky painted in shades of gold and purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. Ethan skipped ahead, laughing as Max chased after a stick he'd thrown into the grass. Watching them, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. Despite everything they'd endured, they had come out the other side together. As they walked, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She thought about the choices she'd made, the risks she'd taken, the sacrifices she'd endured, all in the name of protecting her family and standing up for what was right. It hadn't been easy, and there were moments when she doubted herself. But looking at Ethan's smiling face and hearing Max's joyful bark, she knew it had all been worth it. When they reached the end of the trail, Sarah knelt down and hugged Ethan tightly, pulling Max close as well. "No matter what happens," she said softly, "we'll always have each other. That's what matters most." And with that, the three of them headed home, ready to rebuild their lives and embrace the future, a future filled with hope, resilience, and love.